Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, October 10th, 2024. Time for another show, unless you live in Florida, I guess, in which case you might be out of power. Or maybe you're working on a generator, battery backup, I don't know. Downloading the podcast later. Whatever it is, we hope everything is okay. I guess awaiting digestion of and then reporting of all of the damage after the hurricane came ashore. But I guess it looked like it was a little bit less fearsome than expected, or I guess fearsome isn't really the right word, but it's certainly less ferocious and less storm surge. I think it mattered a great deal where exactly the eye made landfall, which would determine the wind direction when it hit Tampa Bay. And if it hits at a certain point, you know, the way the winds rotate, it's blowing all the water up into Tampa Bay and flooding the land. And if it's going the other way, if it makes landfall further south and the winds are blowing outward, then less flooding, maybe no storm surge flooding. I don't know exactly how it's going to work. If you blow all that water out, it's going to come back, and I guess probably some flooding, but not as bad as they thought. And I guess they got a little bit lucky in Tampa, but the storm hit further south, so sort of awaiting the report on the damage is the only thing I've seen so far universally, like wherever you turn. They got their photo out of it. The roof of the baseball stadium in Tampa, and I forget the name of it, but everybody knows it apparently, where the who plays there? The Ray, I don't even remember. Who's it's Rays that play there? I don't know. Anyway, I don't follow things enough anymore, and I stopped looking at back in my day there was only 4 teams, and yeah, okay. Anyway, it turns out that they had some significant damage to the baseball stadium there, which Tampa Bay Rays. Okay, I'm like, all of a sudden I'm doubting myself. I'm pretty sure that's it. They've been around for quite a while, so I don't know what the problem was, but anyway, just radio jitters, I guess. At any rate, what's their stadium? Does it say like in their what do you call it? Wikipedia entry? Yes. Oh, Tropicana Field. That makes some sense, right? Which I guess, yeah, that's right. And everybody was talking about it, calling it the Trop yesterday. And I guess it's an indoor stadium. I don't know what they make those roofs out of, but they're soft material and they blow apart in hurricanes. And this one did too. But I don't know if there's like major damage to the interior of the stadium. Season's over, I suppose. So good timing in that respect. But apparently 3 million without power down in Florida. And not a one of them is Ron DeSantis either. And we were kind of hoping for that. Not that he would. I don't care whether he loses electricity. I just don't want him in power. Anyway, we'll see how the recovery goes. But I think they were spared the absolute worst disaster scenarios. But yeah, we're going to have to see what comes of this. And of course, there's still danger, and flooding is always dangerous, property damage, billions of dollars, I'm sure, once again, lost to a climate change fueled major storm. And then we also have to wade through more nonsense about Republicans believing, like mainstream Republicans even, at least being willing to parrot the crazy stuff that used to be fringe, things like, Democrats control the weather, Jews control the weather, leprechauns control the weather, somebody's controlling the weather, the Chinese. And I think at one point Donald Trump did that one. Do the Chinese have a hurricane gun that they're creating hurricanes and pointing them at the United States? And also that guy would be, possibly commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces and given the power to launch nuclear weapons. He also, of course, thought a great deal, apparently, about using nuclear weapons against hurricanes, which is maybe that, I don't know, was that related at all? Did he feel like it would be more justified to use nuclear weapons against hurricanes despite finding out that there would be adverse effects, massive amounts of nuclear radiation being spewed all over the place by a gigantic storm, like Sharknado, but with nuclear fallout in it instead of sharks. But I guess maybe he thought that was justified, given that I'm just wondering whether he thought if China was weaponizing the weather, wouldn't it be justified to use nuclear weapons to stop them, because we're already in a shooting war, so what the hell? I don't know. Might as well make it worse. I don't know. Not sure. No real chance of learning what's going on in his head. But this is apparently something they believe, that someone's controlling the weather, and no one's really sure why this would happen. By the way, give me control of the weather. 400 hurricanes a day at Pervalago. Forever. It closed the place. If I'm controlling the weather, I'm not sending it, to the other coast of Florida. And they would follow him around, and every rally would be in a hurricane. It would be so easy. And yet this is what they believe. And not only that, I find it interesting that they believe that humans have developed in secret somehow the ability to control the weather to that extent, to create hurricanes. But if you try to talk to them about, man-made, human-made, I guess we should be saying, climate change. No. That's ridiculous. That's just natural and cyclical. We can't have an impact on that. Yes, we can create hurricanes. Weather isn't climate, but that would be a new thing for them too. So it requires a lot of thinking, and I guess they're not really all that into that. All right, well, lots of other things happening. Lots of other dumb things said by Donald Trump, and I guess that will require some reporting. He's done another rally or two and thrown out a little bit of the racism and a little bit of the stupidity. It's all out there for you to see. And let's see. Well, we can find some of it online and on the social media side of things. Although one that came up, not from the context of the rally, but another sort of sane washing incident happening at, I guess, if I recognize the typefaces, this New York Times stuff. It's usually them. But somebody else saying, this is an all-time winner here. This is the post from one Molly Wilson O'Reilly. Got a lot of attention. This headline stack is one for the time capsule. Somebody else said all-time, winner of the side-by-side headline wars here. But this is, I guess, the listing of the various stories that you could be reading on the New York Times. This headline stack. First, analyzing Harris's message discipline, which is the spin that the Democrats would put on it, which is common to normie politicians, as if it's uniquely revealing and shifty. That is the headline that reads, in interviews, Kamala Harris continues to bob and weave. They're very concerned that she's not sticking strictly to the topic of answering the question as phrased, as opposed to either rejecting the premise of the question, rewriting the premise of the question, or using it as a launching pad for messaging that she wants to get across, which is frustrating, and in the moment, but understandable overall, and of course a tool of every politician in the world, including of course the people on the other side of this contest. Donald Trump can't really be said to be engaging in that tactic only because he's just never on topic. And I mean, it should still be an issue. If that's really an issue for everybody, it isn't. But they only dislike it when they see it from Democratic politicians. J.D. Vance just outright, what about the situation in Springfield? The people you're talking about as being illegal immigrants are, in fact, here with legal status. Well, I don't care. I'm going to call them illegal anyway. It doesn't vary from the topic, but it's not an answer that's valid either. And of course, right, every time he's asked a question point blank that makes him uncomfortable, he shifts immediately to whataboutism. It's a tried and true tactic. Well, it's a tried tactic anyway. So, in interviews, Kamala Harris continues to bob and weave. The little blurb that they give it here says her media swing showed how often she responds to uncomfortable questions by acknowledging them, yet not fully answering them. And then the next headline in the stack is about Trump. In remarks about migrants, Donald Trump invoked his long-held fascination with genes and genetics. That is to say, he said, well, they're not sending their best people, et cetera, et cetera. The immigrants that are coming to this country. He's essentially saying, well, I'm a big believer in good genes. That is to say, I believe I have good genes. And my kids are who they are because they have good genes. Now, they're train wrecks, but and their gene pool is likewise a mess. But what an interesting cover, right? I'm interested. He actually said it this way, and they printed it this way. I'm interested in genetics, or I'm a believer in genetics. Well, you have to be a believer in genetics. Genetics is a real thing. But what he's saying is he believes certain traits are genetically passed on, and genetics tells us that they're probably not genetically connected, at least not directly. And so he's got a big fascination with misunderstanding genetics, and then, of course, using it for racist purposes. It's worth pointing out that when he talks about, well, genetics, he means that there are certain races of people whose genetics are inferior. That's racism. That's the actual, if there's ever a science of race differentiation that's used to prove belief that certain races are superior or inferior, well, that would be the ism that we're talking about, racism. And yet they still, he's like literally describing the dictionary definition of racism, and he still won't get the label. But how interesting that they say he's got a long-held fascination with genes and genetics. That is, he thinks he has good genes, and he thinks everybody else has bad genes. And yet that is not genetics. That's just belief in his being awesome and everybody else being terrible. And I guess it would be like saying, well, historians have revealed now that World War II is over, Hitler had a long-standing, long-held fascination with combustion and thermodynamics and the laws of combustion. That he wasn't burning people in concentration camp ovens. He loved thermodynamics. No, he was an insane murderer and a racist at that, and whatever. But no one, I don't know. Up until recently, nobody's been interested in covering for Hitler. Well, except for the train thing. Everybody seems to think the trains ran on time, which, as it turns out, it was pretty normal. They ran at the usual anticipated delays. Anyway, so what else is new? There's a lot. Let's see. I'm going to scroll back and see. I know some of these things I didn't actually have to put aside. Oh, yes, right. Yesterday was a repeat of the common refrain. Well, it's become common. I've heard this one used before, but I guess now people are focusing. Remember how we learned that people only pay attention after Labor Day, etc. So Trump now on stage in his rally in Reading, Pennsylvania, where, by the way, he bought the railroad. But there are 3 others out there. We have to prevent him from getting a monopoly. In Reading, he is on stage in his rally saying, and quoting here, Aaron Rupar has the video clip about, I guess we can, does he have it in here? It's not embedded? No, not in this one. So for some reason. But otherwise we could play it for you. Now we'll just have to imitate the voice. But speaking of MAGA America's fear of transgender issues, wokeism, as they like to refer to it, and then, of course, Chris Rufo's specialty, the wokeism, the CRT, the something's wrong in the schools, that the public schools somehow are out of control in some way and are doing things wrong, all mixed up in one. Now Trump telling the crowd in Reading, Pennsylvania, your child goes to school and they take your child. It was a he and comes back a she. And they do this, and often without parental consent. Can you believe we're saying this? Is now pitching it to the MAGA crowd that, as a matter of routine, in public schools across America, you're sending your young boy to 3rd grade class, and he's coming back having been transitioned in gender to a girl. that very afternoon. The schools where you don't have construction paper or pens and pencils and crayons in the classroom unless the teacher buys them. But that's only because they're spending all their money on free transgender surgeries that they are accomplishing inside of the 6-hour school day with no recovery time whatsoever. So apparently we just have people in the wrong professions. The teachers should be handling the operations and running the hospitals, and the doctor should be, I guess, we can swap with them, unless there's a better station for them. But yeah, that's really kind of amazing. And not really likely the way things are working out there. It's a little bit of a stretch, but it is amazing that he's got people believing, oh, the video is embedded here. Okay. Well, I don't know. I guess there's no point in playing it for you. I gave you the voice and everything, but, yeah, it's really, I don't know. I guess it's still alarming every once in a while to see just how far you can push these crowds to believe this stuff. It's not clear from the crowd reaction, I guess, how many of them believe it. But they love to go and be lied to, and he loves to do it. It's gone way beyond, there's litter boxes in the schools. Now they're performing surgeries in the schools. And somebody else pointed out online yesterday, Thomas Nguyen, who says, who by the way is on Blue Sky as Nuge, Nuge. Is that a nickname for his last name? Anyway, just saying, pointing out, I must co-sign with at least one parent medication administration forms so that students can take non-prescription drugs at school, right? You have to sign a thing. Oh, my kid got a headache and needs aspirin. The school nurses can't do anything anymore. They're not letting them do their jobs like the cops, I guess. I don't know. And Trump would care about that if school nurses were beating people up, I guess, or at least minorities. But apparently not this. But yeah, they can't do a thing other than assess the problem, I guess. And maybe they're still allowed to put Band-Aids on scraped knees. I don't know. But you have to jump through all sorts of hoops if your kid takes medication. God help you if the kid needs prescription medication administered in the middle of the day on a certain time schedule. You got to fill out all sorts of forms. But they're just, winging it with gender reassignment surgeries. And they're doing it without even telling the parents. The kids don't want it. The parents don't want it. It doesn't matter. We need to have 10 boys and 10 girls in this class for gender equity. So we're changing one of you. I imagine that's the next accusation. So the litter box thing falls by the wayside, and now they're just going straight to gender assignments in school. And he's saying it, and there's no stopping it. Others have pointed out, of course, this is going to, of course, create more trouble for people. Everybody's getting death threats these days. The meteorologists who told people a giant hurricane is coming to Florida and you should evacuate and take precautions, et cetera, are apparently getting death threats because MAGA wackos believe that the hurricane was created by their political enemies and aimed at Florida. And meteorologists who decline to tell people that they need to evacuate because the leprechauns have sent a hurricane are getting death threats. How dare you not tell the same lie I believed on television to millions of others? I'll kill you unless you go back on the air, I guess, and tell it. So they're getting death threats. And then, of course, now school administrators and teachers will, of course, be getting more because they're already getting plenty of death threats. And by the way, they're also getting death as school shooters continue to barge their way into buildings that have doors. Huh? How dare you? Where's dramatic music? This building has 2 entrances. You're obviously doomed. And of course, the Republican solution, by the way, is that teachers, when you're done with your long work day, finish grading papers, go to the gun range for official training to become John Wick so you can shoot it out with a school shooter in your classroom around your kids. That's the brilliant solution to all this, plus the doors. And yeah, and at the same time, we also want to kill you because litter boxes. Like, how do they live in this world I don't know how they put this all together. The same teachers who were randomly assigning genders to kids without their knowledge or consent and putting out litter boxes, et cetera, we're also going to arm them. Okay. And they'll turn good right about the time that somebody breaks into the school and starts shooting. I'm not really sure how you put that one together. Anyway, it was a little odd. And now, of course, we'll be finding school administrators being threatened over the lies that he tells about them, giving away free surgery, because that's what schools are all about, right? Where they're fighting over whether or not they can make lunch free. But the surgeries are covered. It's no problem. George Soros, I'm sure, is cutting the check for that, right? Or the leprechauns bring their pot of gold. That could possibly be it. Yeah. Where is the leprechaun's gold? At the end of the rainbow, right? We figured it all out now. We're oh my God, we might start making sense. I might be elected to office as a Republican inadvertently. I had no idea. If they can reassign your gender without anybody's consent or even knowledge, you never know. I could end up being a Republican congressman. Anything's possible in America. But I was saying that with all of this new threat, we're going to be finding more death threats against school administrators, teachers, etc. And it reminds me, as I think about the month or so, I guess maybe a little bit more than a month, in which Trump apparently experienced 2 assassination attempts. I am reminded from time to time that people, they were saying these threats will probably increase. Somebody's going to get killed over these lies. And anything, I have to point out, that gets someone killed under circumstances like this also raises the risk of, they never think about this for some reason, and, you want to push this out of your mind, I'm sure, but it raises the risk of retaliatory strikes, let's say, by the people left behind, the ones who suffer these losses and become convinced that they no longer have anything else to lose, so what the hell, might as well act out on my emotions and hit back and go after the guys. There are many who are perpetuating the stuff, the nonsense, the lies, the vicious rumors and threats that cost me my family, my life. And I'm taking it out on these guys. And whether that is because there were threats against school administrators and one of your family members or significant others was killed as a result of this, or whether it is, as we watch once again this morning, another video making the rounds, hitting Republicans rightly on the subject of their outrageous restrictions on reproductive care and abortion in the many states, a very long, lengthy video. I used to be critical of these extra long videos that were being circulated as, look at this hard-hitting, powerful ad, but knowing that anything longer than 28 seconds is not really meant to be an ad and is never going to air on television. 60-second spot for things like this is going to be way too expensive. No one's going to pay for it. It may air once technically, often to make it eligible for different categories of advertising industry award shows, but, not really widely seen by anyone. But now, as no one watches linear television anymore anyway, and even if you watch things on clips on YouTube, you're very often served an ad that you can't back out of, at least not for the first sometimes 30 seconds on these things. I guess you will be able to see these lengthy things after all if people just don't press the skip ad button. So it's a greater possibility. But now the, who is it? The Lincoln Project is, I know mixed reviews for the Lincoln, mixed feelings about the Lincoln Project, but a new piece called It Could Happen Here. And, that could be anything. But in this case, it is about the impact of the abortion bans in multiple states have had on actual families who have experienced medically difficult and even life-threatening pregnancies and been unable to get the care that they need when they need it, telling their stories in very poignant fashion. This, too, though, is another situation where somebody's going to get killed and somebody's going to be left behind and feel like they lost their entire family. And they will, in some cases, have lost their entire family. And the point of this particular ad seemed to be that they were featuring families from what is now referred to as this vast abortion desert from the South, as Kamala Harris pointed out in her appearance on Call Her Daddy with Alex Cooper, right? Got it. The entire South bans abortion with the exception of Virginia. And you're talking about, if you want to ring the bells with the MAGA crowd, there's no ringing their bells. Their bells were rung so hard, there's no more ringing it. But these are, in many cases, they're mostly white couples and heartland or southern couples, just describing that the experience of having to escape the abortion desert. So, I mean, these are people that MAGA won't discount immediately because they look, sound, or act differently from them. And if they're culturally, related to the MAGA crowd, we are talking about people who might lose their children and their wives, white men, southern white men in some cases, who would lose their wives and children, their entire families in one fell swoop because of this, and who are, let's say, avid hunters who maintain at home a stockpile of AR-15s and the like, and might be revenge-minded. This, too, is a situation where someone could get killed under circumstances like this, and it might, in fact, raise the risk of retaliatory strikes by those who suffer that loss and are convinced that they no longer have anything else to lose. And, that's an issue. But hey, if Republicans were able to understand the concept of downstream effects, we wouldn't be having a lot of the problems that we're having today. Unfortunately, not so. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So that was some sort of opening ramble on what Donald Trump has been lying about most recently. And these are important subjects, and I got to mark some of these things so that I can find them and provide them to you for today's story roundup so that you can click on the links and be sure that these things actually happened. Okay, let's see. There are many others still waiting for attention. Plus, of course, I do have a couple of recorded segments from our listener friends out there who have contributed to try and, they were looking to take the burden off of filling up the content, substitute content for last week's Thursday show. But as it turns out, there was the Jack Smith filing that was more than enough, more than we could fit in even 3 shows. And so I've had them here, and it's time to start catching up on these things before they age too much And I don't know, we'll try and work a couple of those in here. And I have, as I mentioned, I'm not ready to go with both of Seth Chipman's contributions, but I've got installment number 1 on hand for a very different kind of story. So perhaps we'll save that one for the end. And maybe now would be a good time to roll out the contribution here from Steve Sittig, who it's been some time since we heard from Steve, and he's given us something that is an easier transition, let's say, because it does, in fact, include the guy who's running for president. He's the Republican nominee, Donald Trump. Slightly different topic, but one of his favorites. An interesting look at his constant babbling about tariffs and how he's going to fix everything with tariffs. And he keeps referring to William McKinley as having been extraordinarily successful in his tariff program. And in fact, he was not particularly successful with his tariffs. And, it's also pretty widely understood that that two of the most dramatic economic downturns the country's ever experienced were related to, in part at least, imbalances in tariff policies. But Trump recalls the era completely upside down and backwards, and it's kind of an interesting historical look. And perhaps we can roll that and get that on the record, because Steve did some good work reading to us from some excellent reporting on the topic.
Hi, David and fellow Kagroites in the morning. This is Steve Sittig, calling from Claremont, California. The LA Times has an amazing columnist, Michael Hiltzik, who writes a couple of times a week on politics and economics. That he does very well researched work, and I'm really impressed, and I thought I'd share this piece with you. In praising 1890s U.S., Trump shows ignorance, by Michael Hiltzik. Donald Trump's fire hose of fabrication and grift has reached such a peak in recent days, from his ludicrous denunciation of Kamala Harris as mentally disabled to his hawking of cheap, cheesy watches for $100,000 in what has been widely interpreted as an invitation to bribery, to his call for one really violent day of unleashed police action to fight crime, that choosing a single unhinged nugget to analyze is a true challenge. But let's examine one that hasn't gotten the attention it deserves, Trump's glorification of the 1890s as the wealthiest in American history. It should go without saying that Trump couldn't be more wrong about that, but because his remarks, uttered in a town hall session Friday in Michigan, have been largely ignored by the political media, we'll say it. Trump's conception of America and the 1890s is important not merely because it displays his utter ignorance of history and economics, but because it relates to his stated economic policies in a second term, namely high tariffs and business deregulation. Indeed, he seems to know one thing about 1890s in America, that it was a period of high tariffs. Or maybe two things, the other being that William McKinley was president, though he didn't take office until 1897. Here's what Trump had to say in Michigan, repeating a theme he had mentioned at earlier rallies. We're lowering taxes. We're going to use tariffs very, very wisely. Our country in the 1890s was probably the wealthiest it ever was because it was a system of tariffs. And we had a president, McKinley, right? You remember McKinley, and then they changed the name. But one of those things, but he was really a very good businessman. We were a very wealthy country. A couple of minor points. McKinley was never a businessman. He was a lawyer. In one of his notable cases as a private attorney, he defended 33 miners charged with rioting in a mine strike, obtaining acquittals for all but one. He served as a prosecutor, U.S. Representative, and Governor of Ohio before reaching the White House. He was assassinated in 1901, leading to the ascension of his Vice President, Theodore Roosevelt. Mount McKinley in Alaska is the former name of the highest peak in North America. It was officially renamed Denali, as the nearby indigenous population called it, under President Obama in 2015. Now let's take a stroll through the 1890s, the real period, not the one imagined by Trump, and ask whether this is a world to which we would wish to return. Republicans might also wish to acquaint themselves with the electoral consequences of Trumpian policies in the 1890s, which were not pretty for them. We'll start with a broad brush. The 1890s brought us the worst stock market crash and one of the deepest depressions up to that point. In retrospect, it was second only to the crash of 1929 and the Great Depression of the 1930s. and by some measures worse than the latter. Americans would remember it as the Great Depression until the 1930s economic reversal supplanted it in the economic lexicon. In the mid-1890s, notes Paul Campos of the University of Colorado Boulder, per capita gross domestic product shrank from $6,400 to $5,500 in 2017 dollars. As of the second quarter this year, it was $68,977 in 2024 dollars. In other words, no one with two brain cells to rub together could think of the 1890s as the wealthiest America ever was. Certainly no one living at the time would wish to relive it. Looking back at the end of December 1893, on the year just coming to a close, the business journal Bradstreet's Weekly called the losses suffered nationwide in financial, commercial, and industrial circles worse than at any time in the past 80 years. On May 5th that year, the New York Stock Exchange had crashed by more than 24% before recovering, the worst intraday collapse until the Great Crash of 1929. The year 1893 was one of two significant economic naders during the decade, the second coming in 1897. The latter was followed by a slow recovery that didn't conclude until after 1900. More than 800 banks failed from 1893 through 1897, more than in any period until the Great Depression. By mid-1894, more than 150 railroad companies with 30,000 miles of track were bankrupt. The unemployment rate through the decade would ultimately approach 20%. Historians pinpoint several causes of the stock market panic of 1893 and subsequent depression, some of which are relevant to Trump's proposals. One was the almost complete absence of business regulation. The 1880s saw the rise of industrial combines overtly designed to suppress competition. Among the most esteemed was the National Cordage Company, or the Cordage Trust, which controlled 90% of the U.S. rope market, then a leading industry. In January 1893, the Cordage Trust executed a 2-for-1 stock split to enhance its appeal to smaller investors with a lower share price. The problem was that, like many other overgrown trusts of the era, its financial condition was opaque to its investors and even its bankers. Only its president and treasurer knew that the Cordage Trust was hobbled by overproduction, a lack of credit, and the evaporation of its working capital. On May 2nd, the trust had assured the public that it had $4 million in ready cash. In fact, the cash box held but $100,000. The end came for Cordage on May 5th. When it abruptly announced that it had been given over to the bankruptcy receivers. The stock market crashed that day. Cordage has collapsed like a bursted meteor, reported the Commercial and Financial Chronicle, and the other industrials have all of them shared to a considerable extent in the decline. Would Trump favor returning the business landscape to the 19th century Wild West? Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation drafted roadmap to a second Trump administration, calls for reducing unnecessary regulatory impediments to capital formation in its chapter on the Securities and Exchange Commission. Existing regulations, it says, are, quote, ineffective, costly, opaque, and largely impervious to reform, end quote. In other words, the project aims to get the government off the backs of Americans so big business can saddle up. Another important factor in the 1890s was tariffs, which, of course, are a leading fixation of Trump's. The Tariff Act of 1890 was known as the McKinley Tariff because McKinley was chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee when it was enacted. An openly protectionist measure, it raised duties as high as 49.5%, in some cases higher than even McKinley favored. Wool and imported tin plate, which was used for ceilings and cheap cookware, were particularly targeted. Americans wholly detested the tariffs, which forced up the prices of popular products. This led to an electoral bloodbath for Republicans in the 1890 midterm elections when the party lost 78 House seats and the Democrats won a 236-vote majority. Even McKinley, who earlier had been gerrymandered into victory, lost his seat. In the 1892 presidential election, Republican Benjamin Harris was turned out of office and Democrat Grover Cleveland won his second term. In control of the White House and both chambers of Congress, the Democrats rolled back many of the tariffs in 1894. After the GOP regained control of the White House and Congress in 1896, the tariffs were restored, some at even higher levels than before. Americans eventually became exasperated again with high tariffs. Democrats regained the House and cut deeply into the GOP's Senate majority in the midterm elections of 1910 and regained the White House with the election of Woodrow Wilson in 1912. The rates were steeply lowered again in 1913. Despite Trump's persistent misrepresentation that tariffs are paid by the target countries, politicians in the late 19th and early 20th centuries saw them as domestic taxes by another name and more politically palatable. Although direct taxes can't be concealed and always cause public debate, Wilson, as historian Joanne R. Retano has observed, noted that very few of us taste the tariff in our sugar. Americans tended to tolerate tariffs until they seemed excessive and designed to favor wealthy industrialists and bankers at the expense of farmers and laborers. Will today's voters have the same understanding, or will the truth about tariffs and the political and economic conditions the McKinley tariff brought about in 1890 reach the public? Trump might not want to hope it does, because the real picture is not as pretty as he paints it. In fact, not pretty at all. Thanks, David. I hope this was helpful.
It certainly was. Thanks, Steve. And my hopes for the truth about the truth about the tariffs of the 1890s and William McKinley reaching the public and having it sink in and saying, no, we can't go back to that. Donald Trump is out of his mind. I mean, the last part, I think, is sinking in. But yeah, I think it's a long shot to believe that anybody is going to give a damn about William McKinley ever again. But it actually probably helps paint Trump as, out of his mind, crazy and rambling. When you bring up William McKinley, it's like a joke at this point. I would imagine that the vast majority of people out there, certainly the vast majority of people who claim to be, say, undecided voters and get themselves interviewed over and over again by the New York Times, do they even know who William McKinley was? Would they be able to pick the name William McKinley out of a lineup of 3 non-presidential fake names, let's say, not even other historical figures, and William McKinley, and pick the president? My guess is probably, perhaps 30% of them would be able to correctly identify the name that had been president at some point. I'm really not sure. Anyway, I found that very interesting, very fascinating, and a big part of it's good to know the historical background and to understand that. I used to think that was useful in case you ever found yourself in conversation with people or needed to debate the historical facts behind the issue. But that increasingly not really a serious part of the discourse. But, we still like to learn things and hear a good historical background here on the show because we're reality based. Okay. So I thought that was, a helpful installation, and I've picked up a link to the LA Times piece, though it's behind a paywall. Some of you who are subscribers might, and if you missed the piece, want to double back and get it. It may, inspire you to subscribe to the LA Times, for all I know. And it may be that it's out there somewhere else for free. But let's all support our journalists, as I like to say. And all right, let's see. I'll load up for later use Seth Chipman's first installation. I guess we can make it a California theme here and add that to the mix. But there are a few bigger picture news items still yet to fill you in on. And where shall we begin? I now have Pocket. The top of Pocket is kind of crammed with the day's various tweets and blue sky posts and offhand notes that we've referred to along the way, just to be sure I can share them with you. There's, let's see, a couple other items to bring in. Something that Greg brought yesterday from the Bulwark, which basically means, never Trumper Republicans. So we take it with that particular grain of salt, a different kind of salt. It's a potassium chloride kind of salt, not a sodium chloride kind of salt. It's a different kind. It's still salt, but it's different than we take when we read things from other mainstream Republicans who are bought into the MAGA myth, let's say. But we still need some salt. This is, I guess, the salt we would be using for Liz Cheney. Take the value of her endorsement for Kamala Harris, apply it to the people for whom it will make sense, and be a net positive. And for the rest of us, you can feel free to say, but I don't like Liz Cheney. That's fine. She's not asking you to vote for Liz Cheney. She's asking you to vote for Kamala Harris, and you do like Kamala Harris. So go ahead. And if you don't like the fact, you don't like the weird aftertaste of voting for the same person as Liz Cheney, well, cover it up with potassium chloride. Okay. Unless that's poisonous. I don't think so. I think that's a salt substitute that they give to people trying to lower their sodium content. I don't know. Anyway, the point really is that I wanted to read you a story from the Bulwark. And I don't know, it's not opening for some reason, but as we play the technical difficulties music and wait for this thing to open, it was an interesting headline. And forget it. I'm not going to tell you the headline because, okay, yes, it will. Now that it's finally opening. A.B. Stoddard's piece, Republicans' closing message, we lie to you. I don't recall specifically Greg bringing this up, although he put it in his lineup of stories, but I don't think we got to it. There was a lot yesterday. I thought I might add this, though. From Springfield, Ohio to the flooded mountain towns of western North Carolina, Republicans are ending the 2024 campaign, and I wish they would, with a torrent of lies, misrepresentations, and falsehoods. You know all about it, but this is an interesting take, I think. At least I like the headline. Donald Trump, as always, engages in demonstrably false lies he is easily caught in, but this time around, he has a running mate who does so too. A few of their fellow Republicans have called out Trump and J.D. Vance for some of their recent lies about Haitians supposedly killing and eating pets in Ohio last month, and about Democrats supposedly holding out on relief for Republicans in storm-ravaged areas. But many other Republicans are parroting the lies. It didn't have to be this way. Republicans hold an edge on the issues most important to voters, the economy and immigration. That edge gone on the economy and probably eroding on immigration as well, and could talk about what is real and offer solutions. Instead, they are frightening voters with lies. In a particularly provocative smear, Trump's son Eric, remember, good genes, etc., even said on Saturday at the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, they tried to kill him, and it's because the Democratic Party, they can't do anything right. So accusing Democrats of trying to kill him, but being inept at doing so. Very interesting tactic. Last week, Trump claimed that Georgia Governor Brian Kemp couldn't reach President Joe Biden in the midst of the Hurricane Helene emergency. He claimed that the federal government, the Democrat governor of North Carolina, were going out of their way to not help people in Republican areas. Asheville, not actually a Republican area. He claimed that Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are, quote, universally being given poor grades for the way they are handling the hurricane, especially in North Carolina. He claimed that Harris and Biden stole the FEMA money just like they stole it from a bank. Which, what? Oh, I see. As if it had been in a bank. Like robbing a bank? Okay. I shouldn't sandwash this. They stole the money just like they stole it from a bank so they could give it to their illegal immigrants that they want to have them vote for them this season. Okay. He claimed while air traffic increased 300% with private and public rescue and relief flights over western North Carolina that Kamala wined and dined in San Francisco, and all the people in North Carolina, no helicopters, no rescue. It's just what happened there is very bad. Yeah, so that was an interesting. They locked down the airspace, no rescues. No, unfortunately, they couldn't lock down the airspace. There was a 300% increase in air traffic. None of this is true. Governors from all the states affected by Hurricane Helene have vouched for the response of the federal government. Yet, backing up Trump and Vance are GOP members of the House and Senate who are fueling distrust about the federal storm relief efforts, trying to convince voters the funds meant to help them are instead going to immigrants for some reason. Senator Ted Budd, you probably forgot he even was a senator, spread some of this BS. Representative Richard McCormick did too. Senator Tom Cotton lengthened his neck a little bit more and said the suggestion FEMA was spending on immigrants instead of storm survivors was not misinformation, and that the Biden administration now can't find the funds to help storm victims in the South. In what sense? No one knows. House Speaker Mike Johnson called the Helene response a massive failure. And while he acknowledged that there are different accounts managing storm relief and managing the housing of immigrants, he suggested that the administration is using any pool of funding from any account for resettling illegal aliens who have come across the border, and said the American people are disgusted. The lies were so egregious and potentially so dangerous. If they mislead people desperate for help, that even some... Oh, okay. I gotcha. I mean, it wasn't a matter of, well, if they do that, well, then we should kill all those guys. No, she doesn't go and say that. The lies are so egregious and potentially so dangerous, they'd be dangerous if they mislead people desperate for help. And so all of this, they're so dangerous that even some Republicans, like the one mentioned yesterday by Greg, and maybe that's how we got to this article, Representative Chuck Edwards of North Carolina, felt forced to debunk the distortions, conspiracy theories, and outrageous rumors for the sake of their constituents' safety. Part of the worry, as I understand it, is if they tell people, well, FEMA won't help you, or they're not there, or they lost all the money, or they gave it all to immigrants, then people won't even bother to go seek help from FEMA or other officials, and will just suffer further losses as a result, maybe even, fall ill, die somehow, but be further damaged from the storm than they should be, because they're just discouraged from even believing the government is trying to help. Meanwhile, it's hard to see how preying on terrified and displaced people who have lost everything could be a path to victory in North Carolina, a purple state that gave Trump his smallest winning margin in 2020 of 74,500 votes, and where the current GOP gubernatorial candidate, a porn addict who calls himself a black Nazi, just in case you were wondering, is down by double digits to his Democratic opponent. A very rare joint editorial by the state's two largest newspapers, that is unusual, I think, titled "Shame on Trump for Worsening North Carolina's Helene Tragedy with Political Lies," it's a long headline, was published last week by both the Charlotte Observer and the News and Observer. There's at least two observers involved in all of this. That's enough to sentence someone for treason. That's good news. But political lies are the campaign now. Republicans no longer use lies as a defensive tool to escape political jams. Spewing falsehoods is now an offensive tactic that they all learned from Trump, what Steve Bannon calls flooding the zone with, well, you know what? Where's my sound effects when I need them? I don't think I have one specifically for that, but I do have the censorship horn. Flooding the zone with you know what. Trump isn't likely to stop. Neither is Vance. After Vance copped to lying about the Haitian residents in Springfield, you remember the line that he gave. Who did he give? Dana Bash got this one. If I have to create stories, then that's what I'm going to do. Well, after that, he kept spreading lies about them, including about their legal status, which we mentioned before. Even following all the harassment, intimidation, bomb threats, evacuations, and school cancellations that resulted from the first lies about pet eating, Vance dug in more, calling the Haitians illegal aliens, even though they are living and working in the United States legally on a temporary basis. Vance chose to lie about policies he doesn't like. He disagrees with the Biden administration's decision to grant temporary protected status to those refugees until February of 2026. So he said that does not magically make them legal because Kamala Harris, who didn't do this, waved the amnesty wand. That makes her border policy a disgrace. And I'm still going to call people illegal aliens. Last week, he smiled his way through laughable lies in the vice presidential debate. Did anyone know that Trump saved Obamacare and transferred power peacefully after the 2020 election? Vance lied with ease, but sneered at the moderator when he got caught. The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, he said to Margaret Brennan. And yes, as it turns out, you've kind of forced it. But I love the appeal to the rules. Exactly the sort of sore loser stuff they used to accuse Democrats of engaging in, and probably will accuse them of again. When asked directly by Tim Walz at the end of their debate whether Biden had won in 2020, Vance tried pivoting to the future. Again, right, this is actually what I had in mind when we were talking about the New York Times' weird framing of Kamala Harris bobbing and weaving and avoiding the question, right? He was asked point blank, Did Trump win or lose? Who's the president? What happened in 2020? And, well, I'm focused on the future. Well, golly, if that isn't bobbing and weaving. Where is that report? Anyway, Vance pivoted to the future while accusing Harris of censoring Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation. It wasn't a deft evasion. It was ludicrous. But that was the point. Flood the zone. Within days of the debate, however, Vance wasn't avoiding the question, like Cotton and Johnson tried to do, painfully. When asked by a political comedian whether Trump won in 2020, Vance said Trump won. What? That's wrong. It seems his damning not answer was not suitable for Trump, so Vance was forced to say what his boss wants, that he beat Joe Biden and won. That is pretty amazing. Knuckling under like that. Intelligent guy. Yale, for God's sake. Yale. I worked my way out from, Appalachia to intellectual leadership of this country. Who won the last presidential election? Lie. Other guy. Why? Because Trump demands it. And Trump demands it and points, readily enough to, well, last time I didn't like the vice president guy. My folks set up a gallows outside of the Capitol and went hunting for him. Now, I'm going to ask you the question again and see what you say this time. He's afraid of the gallows. That's why he's answering the questions this way. Gratuitous lies Republicans tell in 2024 are rooted in the big lie. Once you are a party to a lie that consequential, smaller ones get easier to tell. That's a strategy. The big lie has changed this country forever. It is why we had January 6th and why the lives of any Republicans who tell the truth are threatened and the lives of election workers are threatened, and why we could have violence in the days and weeks following this election, and why radicalized Republicans at the local level are all planning to delay certification of the election this time, in fact. I've lost my place in the sentence here. And why Trump was able to be nominated again, by the way, and positioned once again to possibly win a second term and replace our democracy with an autocracy. Let's see if we can't finish here before the music. Prepare yourself for this ugly reality. Every Republican in elected office will be expected to go out and lie again if Trump loses on November 5th, and they will do it even if it causes violence. We know that because they are lying now about things that could endanger their fellow Americans who are grieving, desperate, and despairing. They looked the other way while Trump lied about COVID, and they're doing it again. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I sorry to have done this to you and to Stoddard here. Is it what's her name? She said I could call her A-B-A-C, whatever it is. A.B. Stoddard is our author. And unfortunately, you run up against the limit right like in the last 5 sentences, the climactic conclusion to the piece, written with all the drama that you're supposed to take away from it. And then, well, we have to take a break. So again, I'll frame it up. We'll rewind and read these concluding paragraphs here. Prepare yourself for this ugly reality, all of the lies the Trump troops will be forced to tell if he loses on November 5th. Every Republican in elected office will be expected to go out and lie again if Trump loses on November 5th. It's just true. Really, no matter what the outcome, they'll be required to go out and lie for Trump about something. And they will do it even if it causes violence, even if they knowingly, they're doing it knowingly. They know it'll cause violence. They have reason to believe it will cause violence. It has caused violence in the past. If they are guaranteed straight up that it will cause violence, some of them will say, good, that's what I meant to do. Just as we learned in the Jack Smith filing, right? Our, was it person 5 in the list, or the unidentified person 5? But who we think is perhaps Mike Roman, I think, is the current thinking, the one who said, well, there's a very tense situation at the vote counting centers. They could be, there could be a riot any minute. Good, do it. Go out, make them riot, right? That's the plan. So prepare yourself for this ugly reality. Republicans in elected office, every single one of them, will be expected to go out and lie again if Trump loses. And they will do it even if it causes violence. They will do it because they know it will cause violence. We know that because they are lying now about things that could endanger their fellow Americans who are grieving, desperate, and despairing. They looked the other way while Trump lied about COVID, and untold thousands died as a result. And they went silent after just days of condemning. Yes, okay, that's a little bit oddly constructed. They went silent after just days of condemning a deadly insurrection. Honesty isn't an option. Honesty gets you the gallows, right? The Republicans' new rule of politics is that they can't be fact-checked. Let's hope they can't get elected. That's true, right? Good point. Well put. I think I saw maybe LOL GOP. I was thinking about the fact-checking thing, saying the other day on Blue Sky, these are the guys who say, I thought the rules were you couldn't fact-check. The people who want to fact-check in your children's underwear to see whether or not they meet their definition of gender conformity. Or maybe there's no particular reason, they just like looking in kids' underwear because they're perverts. The pedocon rule applies as always. But the cover is, well, I also want to make sure that they're not going to victimize other people. So I'm going to victimize them so that they can't victimize other people. But even if they victimize other people later, who cares? The point is I wanted to victimize them right now by looking in their underwear. Imagine that, right? Some precocious kid now, I want to play on the volleyball team. Sorry, I got to look in your underwear. Why? I need to find out what your gender is to check whether or not you're truly the gender you say you are. And the answer is, I was told that the rules were that you guys couldn't fact check. That won't stop anybody. Logic never does, but it would be a hell of an answer. It wouldn't help you any. Probably get you suspended. Or, in a fascist future, just plain killed on the spot. Okay, just wanted to add that one to the mix. I thought it was important. And good point. Again, taking it with a little bit of potassium chloride, but there you have it. Other stories to share with you. There are several, some of which are longer than others. Let's see. Where shall we land first? How about this one? This interesting side note, part of the... Oh, okay, we got to turn down the sound on this laptop here. Pop-up ad that started playing. I usually have the sound muted on the laptop. But part of the flooding the zone from J.D. Vance. And again, just a reminder, the dual purposes of flooding the zone, and one of which it has to deal with the fact-checking. Like, you'll never get to the bottom of the list of fact-checking. You can't keep up because the number of lies is so huge, and so maybe you'll let some of them slip by unanswered because you simply don't have the time. The other, kind of the second level of flooding the zone is causing so many problems in the real world, not just fact-checking, and debating back and forth, but causing so many crises and committing so many crimes that law enforcement can't keep up either. But at any rate, first, back to the basic level of it. J.D. Vance lying so much that nobody has time to call them all out. And here's one. This from, we've been to this source before, Jalopnik, which is like a car, cars and trucks and driving kind of a news site. So how is it related? What did J.D. Vance lie about that has to do with the automotive industry? Well, here's the answer. J.D. Vance rally attendees wearing Auto Workers for Trump t-shirts weren't actually auto workers. Oh, my God, hired actors, something like that, something blah, 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 hypocrisy. Surely, they'll be held to account. No, probably not. Owen Bellwood is the author over at Jalopnik, taking up this, I love when they get political. Hey, you give us an entree into politics, we'll take it. Political rallies bring out all kinds of catchy slogans from people who are there to support their heroes. Now a group of people supporting, quote, Auto Workers for Trump tops at now a group of people sporting Auto Workers for Trump tops. They're shirts. Tops. It's not a fashion accessory. All right, whatever. At a J.D. Vance rally this weekend in Detroit, have been found to have very little in common with the message they're supporting. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, you get it? They're not auto workers. In Detroit this week, Vice Presidential hopeful J.D. Vance hosted a rally to drum up support for Donald Trump in his re-election campaign. During the sparsely attended rally, a group of supporters was spotted sporting T-shirts emblazoned with the slogan, Auto Workers for Trump. You know, watching with the sound off, you think there are lots of auto workers for Trump. I've seen some on TV. I know they are auto workers for Trump because they wore T-shirts that said that. And who would wear such a T-shirt if they weren't an auto worker for Trump? Well, who would be white and hold up blacks for Trump signs at rallies, thinking that somehow that would work? I don't know, but people have actually done it. Well, anyway, the T-shirts might lead you to think that the people wearing them had some kind of humble jobs in the auto industry. It appears that at least around half of the people wearing the tops don't work in the auto industry at all, reports the Detroit News. Should be the Fashion News, I guess. Vance, the running mate of former President Donald Trump and U.S. Senator from Ohio, spoke and took questions for about an hour in Detroit's Eastern Market Shed 3. Is that a big site? I really don't know. It makes it sound like it's tiny. Several hundred people attended the event, including more than a dozen who were wearing Auto Workers for Trump shirts. However, 6 of the people in the shirts told the Detroit News on Tuesday they were not actually auto workers. By the way, why do they? I'm curious why they admit it, and I think part of it is because what are you going to do about it? Good. I hope you're angry about my blatant lies for the next 5 days, as opposed to doing anything, or I don't know. So, I mean, I think it's a power trip to some extent. Yeah, because otherwise, like, why don't you just say, yeah, I'm an auto worker. Where do you work? Ford. You know, I mean, who? The newspaper guys can't even tell when somebody's an undecided voter or not. They're not going to be able to fact check. And even if they do, you can say you weren't allowed. The shirts were distributed by the Auto Workers for Trump 2024 group, reports Newsweek. So doesn't that answer the question? Of course they're auto workers. They're from Auto Workers for Trump. That's the group. Well, you know, we're faking it. The organization was reportedly set up following the United Auto Workers Union's endorsement of Kamala Harris. The group was formed by retired auto worker Brian Pennebecker, I don't know, who distributed the shirts to spectators and asked members of the auto industry to attend the rally alongside him wearing one of the shirts, as Newsweek reports. Pennebecker told Newsweek Tuesday evening that he had asked from 30 to 40 auto workers, both active and retired, if they would like to attend the event to show support for the Republicans' pro-American worker policies. A couple of the active auto workers said they had to work. Sorry about that. I mean, of course, they're auto workers. That's very conscientious of them. I assume that also means that they didn't want to have any part of this thing, but okay. I just find that funny. Hey, can you come to the rally? No, I'm an auto worker. What's wrong with you? A couple of the active auto workers said they couldn't get off work and asked if their spouse could have a seat in their place, he said in a written statement. That's less funny, but I like the setup. Of course, I said yes, because these families deserve the opportunity to show their support for the candidates who understand what needs to be done to save Detroit's automotive industry and our economy. Despite that, they went to the Donald Trump rally. While 30 to 40 auto workers were approached to wear the tops, I love it's more frequently said than shirts. Are they something other than tops? Are they sarongs? What are they? They're T-shirts. I don't understand why they keep being referred to as tops. Anyway, however, their presence was enough to lead Vance to call himself an ally of the auto industry while on stage, adding that should Trump win in November, the administration will throw its support in the garbage behind the American auto industry. Will it? Golly, that's terrific. Analysts aren't so sure of these promises, however, with some warning that Trump's policies could pave the way for China to become a global leader in EVs, electric vehicles, and leave America in the dust. I don't think they say electrical these days, or maybe ever. Anyway, there you have it. Anyway, I get it. Like, I have to work, but can my wife go in my place? Can my spouse go in my place? I wonder, were any of them, they're log cabin Republicans. So, I don't know whether they refer to them just spouse. They just say husband. These are traditionalists, so we're really not sure. But confused traditionalists that we're talking about here. All right. Well, no one's wearing anything that wouldn't be describable as a T-shirt here. So I don't really, in the photo that illustrates the piece. Anyway, just found that interesting and then got a good laugh out of it anyhow. I can't go to the thing. I'm an auto worker. You know what the important part of that is? The second half of the compound word, worker. I got to go. All right. I also mentioned to you that there was the weird thing, the setup of the Starlink being offered by Elon Musk to people in the affected areas hit by Hurricane Helene who were cut off in communications, that he was going to give them free Starlink for 30 days. And it turns out that he's still going to charge them for the equipment that they need in order to make it work. And so it was their standard everyday consumer offer, free for 30 days, but you pay for the equipment. And then after that, it's $120 a month, which is interesting. I mean, it's kind of like a stolen valor type analogy, if you ask me, right? I'm helping the people in the storm ravaged states with a special offer, free Starlink for a month. But not only is it not free, it's actually no different than I would offer somebody in California right now. You want the service free for 30 days? Fine. I'll charge you $120 after that. Plus, you got to pay $400 for the satellite equipment and get it installed and pay the shipping. That's the news. And I don't know. Do I really have to read you the full write-up on it? It's from theregister.com, which is what? I don't really know where I think I've read something from the Register before and been equally confused about exactly who they are and what they do. But they did a nice write-up of it. And under the headline, Starlink was offered for free to those hit by Hurricane Helene. It is not entirely free. And now SpaceX clarifies the special promotion. An update. I guess we can read that. But otherwise, you kind of got the idea. And I'll just give you the link to establish that it came from a place that was putting their name out there and claiming that they had done the reporting on this. Brandon Vigliarolo, as a matter of fact, the name on the piece. That guy's AI, though. You know how it goes. I don't know anything about him. The free Starlink service that Elon Musk and SpaceX so graciously promised for communities devastated by Hurricane Helene in the U.S. is not actually entirely free, according to those living in the aftermath and the internet satellite operator's own sign-up page. There is a significant caveat. You are still expected to foot the bill for the hardware. So there you go. I mean, that's the long and short of it. And rather than read you the entire piece, and there's some interesting context and back and forth, but I would prefer to leave that to you. But so here, I'll just give you the link to establishing the validity, or at least this reporter's belief that this is a valid claim. There are a couple more reports on it too, but like I said, there are a number of other things that we would like to get to and bring to your attention. Let's see, maybe now would be a good time to load up the segment I have on to do the entire California thing. And is SpaceX California based? Or did they move to Texas? Like along with Tesla, I know that Musk was threatening to move all of the operations to super free Texas versus California. But let's see, opening up the piece here from Seth Chipman, who part 1 of 2 on California water issues that, takes you into some small bore stuff. But I don't know, it seems like an important and political story in a swing, or not a swing, in a solidly blue state where, I don't know, people might be, for whatever reason, less than motivated to, in some cases, go out and vote. In some cases, voting down ballot. But just so you know what's going on locally, and I guess this is rather controversial. I'd like to do some additional reading about it too. But Seth seems to think that this particular targeting of a local official who is, as Seth describes it, is trying to, actually do some good and change water policy for the better in California being targeted, presumably by people who benefit from the status quo. But a long-running and interesting saga. Let's start out with the first installment. Seth?
Good morning, David and KITM listeners. This is Seth Chipman. Today I have for you a story, a couple of segments actually, about a story relating to some California water politics issues. Loosely, I'll characterize this as a story of kind of the older big ag, big development, big money forces that have run the politics of water in the state for a long time in a very non-conservation oriented way. How these forces are pushing back against attempts to move forward with making California's water consumption more environmentally conscious. And loosely, this is a story of those forces trying to push back against the current general manager of the state's largest urban water supplier. This general manager is named Adel Haji Khalil. I'm just going to read the Wikipedia description of the district that he oversees. So that is the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, is a regional wholesaler and the largest supplier of treated water in the U.S. The name is usually shortened to MET, Metropolitan, or MWD. It is a cooperative of 14 cities, 11 municipal water districts, and 1 county water authority that provides water to 19 million people in a 5,200 square mile service area. It was created by an act of the California State Legislature in 1928, primarily to build and operate the Colorado River Aqueduct. Metropolitan became the first and largest contractor to the State Water Project in 1960. Metropolitan owns and operates an extensive range of capital facilities, including the Colorado River Aqueduct, which runs from an intake at Lake Havasu on the California-Arizona border to its endpoint at the Lake Matthews Reservoir in Riverside County. It also imports water supplies from Northern California via the 444-mile California Aqueduct as a contractor to the State Water Project. In 1960, Metropolitan became the first and largest contractor to the State Water Project. Metropolitan's extensive water system includes 3 major reservoirs, 6 smaller reservoirs, 830 miles of large-scale pipes, about 400 connections to member agencies, 16 hydroelectric facilities, and 5 water treatment plants. It serves parts of Los Angeles, Orange, San Diego, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura counties. The district covers the coastal and most heavily populated portions of Southern California, while large portions of San Diego, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties are located outside of its service areas. So that's just a description of the district that we're talking about, and then the story is going to go into some controversies, some issues surrounding the current general manager of that district. And what stands out to me about this whole story is just the way that the filing of a complaint can just manufacture a story that can do so much damage. And, this is a good guy, a force for good in these issues. And just one complaint against him leads to the media having to sort of both sides the issue and just create this controversy out of nothing. And this gentleman, Adel Haji Khalil, his attitude from the get-go has been, I'm happy that these investigations are going to happen. Look into anything I've done. He's been completely transparent, but nonetheless, his work has been very much complicated by these issues. So, this first article is by Politico. The writer is Blanca Begert, B-E-G-E-R-T, from August 28th of this year. It is titled, California's Largest Water District Extends GM's Leave as Harassment Investigation Continues. The subheader reads, the state's largest urban water supplier extended Adel Haji Khalil, that's Hagekhaliil, Haji Khalil's 90-day administrative leave to 130 days. And the article begins. Southern California's largest water supplier on Tuesday extended the administrative leave of its general manager and CEO while it investigates harassment claims against him. The Metropolitan Water District of Southern California's board voted Tuesday to extend Adel Haji Khalil's leave until October 23rd. He had been scheduled to return September 12th, pending the results of the investigation. In a public comment period ahead of a closed board session, Haji Khalil lambasted the investigation, noting that he had yet to be contacted by investigators 74 days into the process. Adel says, "It is now time for me to come back and be with you and take this journey again. Over 74 days ago, you unfairly placed me on leave, and as of today, I still have not been contacted about this investigation." Met's board placed Haji Khalil on a 90-day leave on June 14th after Chief Financial Officer and Assistant General Manager Katano Kasane, that's Katano Kasane, accused him of harassment, retaliation, and creating a hostile work environment. Haji Khalil detailed on Tuesday how he came into his role at a fraught time for the agency that was marked by harassment and retaliation complaints and had worked to change the culture. "Unfortunately, every action I took, I was faced with a frivolous complaint and leaks," he said. His lawyers said the fact that he had been denied access to his email and to agency documents and had not been informed in advance about the agenda for the day's closed session to discuss the investigation hampered his ability to participate and called the process into question. At the meeting, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power former General Manager Marty Adams spoke in support of Haji Khalil, as did several members of environmental groups, some of whom have suggested the investigation is a conspiracy to topple a water conservationist. You had a change agent that was bringing in a different culture that needed to change, and the result is that he is sitting in the audience with his lawyer, said Connor Everts, representing the environmental group Southern California Watershed Alliance. Rank-and-file employees also spoke at the meeting to decry more broadly what electrician Gonzalo Pantoja described as the complete and total lack of accountability for management. "Please note that these issues began long before Adel," said Fleet Program Manager Jolene Fuentes. The board and leadership didn't comment on the investigation at the meeting, but spokesperson Rebecca Kimmich said in a statement that the investigation is being conducted by an ad hoc committee of board and outside investigators, and that the internal counsel is not involved. Interim General Manager Devin Upadhyaya, that's Deven Upadhyay, said he's working to address the housing, safety, and cultural issues raised by workers, citing meetings, a survey, and a recent civility training for leadership. "While everything isn't perfect, I do want to acknowledge that we have folks that are truly dedicated to tackling these issues," he said. The board will reconvene on the issue on October 22nd. That concludes the Politico article, and so I only am aware of this whole story because I have an acquaintance who is professionally involved in water conservation in California, and I have just been amazed by how the filing this complaint has created a whole narrative that Adel, this agent for positive change in the whole story, and water conservation in California is a hugely important issue, but how this complaint has really just created its own narrative that Adel is causing harm, not the right person, and it's just really unfortunate how easy it can be for one person to just create this whole negative narrative and prevent the important change that needs to happen in this water district. I do have a longer article from the LA Times, but that concludes this first segment. Thank you, David. Thank you all for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to Patreon for Netroots Radio and for KITM. Keep all this important stuff that we listen to coming. And if anybody wants to get involved in this issue at all, in defense of Adele, it's very easy. I've done it. You can call into these public meetings just to state your support for him and continue to ask for transparency in these investigations. The contact person to learn more about this would be Katie Wagner at the Sierra Club. Her email is Katie, that's actually CATY.Wagner, WAGNER, at sierraclub.org.
All right. Oops, I missed out on the way that one was going to phase out. But yeah, thanks very much. I know it was a rather lengthy one, and there's actually more to come on it. I just thought it was an interesting look on the local level at what is essentially the same flood the zone, I guess, tactic by Republicans, or at least Republican-allied interests in these cases. And it's also a little bit reminiscent of some of the voter suppression work that's going on here, where one person in a local Republican-dominated county can challenge the voter registration in some states of hundreds, thousands, with no basis, just simply register the complaints and tie up the election board in reviewing them. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Underage Radio. I am glad we were able to fit that segment in just in time. As I said, it reminded me of the voter suppression play that the Republicans are running in a strange way, right? If you have a change agent who, for whatever reason, either can't be dislodged or they don't want the fingerprints of dislodging him, you can now, in the current environment, and there's a lot of angles and a lot of entry points where you can do this, tie somebody up in allegations, or at least defense of allegations, and possibly an investigation, a suspension from the job, simply by levying lobbing the accusations in the right direction, and making them about. I mean, I guess if you could do it on just about anything. I guess it reminds me also of what I thought would be a preferred tactic among Republicans would be pointing to, and they did for a while try and do this, pointing to every Democrat. Well, the whole QAnon conspiracy pointed and said every Democrat is a pedophile, a vampire pedophile, no less. I guess they went a little bit too far in hitting the vampire part, but and thereby, I guess, dissuaded people from picking up that mantle. But the idea certainly could have swamped multiple Democrats in ongoing investigations just to prove that these things are ridiculous allegations. They have to end up submitting to investigation, and who knows what, seize their computers, shut down their whole operations, while the FBI or whoever combs over everything looking for evidence of something that the Republicans just made up in the first place. Closer to the real world, though, they are doing this in the voter suppression zone, that zone that they're also flooding. We've read stories in the past of states that have changed their laws such that it is now permissible for a single person to basically randomly challenge the voter registration of thousands of people at once, sometimes on no premise whatsoever, and sometimes on only the thinnest pretext. These are people who changed their address in the last 3 years, or people who haven't, for that matter, like in Georgia, voted in the last 2 federal elections, which is not a whole lot of federal elections to skip, by the way. Now, of course, expanding into other areas. And in fact, I've got an article from today's Washington Post, maybe yesterday's, This is an October 9th article, and I don't know, I may have launched directly into the hurricane stuff and not told you that today is October 10th, but you probably knew that already. A little bit of weird lag happening today. I know Justice mentioned that there's some strange lag in the beginning of the live stream today. Podcast listeners won't notice that, but I see there's some lag in just everything. It must be on my end. Everything loading a little bit slow. Washington Post story from yesterday. Yes, Dateline yesterday. Colby Itkowitz and Amy Gardner on a piece titled Republicans Challenge Legitimacy of Overseas Votes, including military. And they do note that that used to be a off-limits group of ballots to challenge because they contained military ballots and something support the troops. But the F that if it might cost us the election. And it should not surprise you, even though this is happening, the focus here is on Pennsylvania lawsuit about this subject, that Cleta Mitchell, who is not from Pennsylvania, is involved in this nonetheless. She, of course, one of the people named, or not named, redacted from the Jack Smith motion filed the other day. And, of course, one of the participants in the infamous call between Donald Trump and Brad Raffensperger, in which he sought to just find enough votes to supposedly win Georgia. You remember that one. We have a clip from that right now.
We found a way in other states later. Excuse me.
Yeah, there we go. So Trump's infamous fart on that particular phone call. But let's get to the substance of the things here. Republicans challenge legitimacy of overseas votes, including military. That's our title. The subheader, a Pennsylvania suit opens a new front in GOP efforts to raise questions about the validity of mail-in ballots, targeting a group once seen as off-limits. This is stage 2, I guess, of the various voter suppression schemes. One is to challenge their voter registrations based on nothing in massive document dumps, that even if it results in no one losing their valid registration, still ties up election staff at a critical time so that they are flooding the zone so that they might be able to sneak other crap past people while they're busy dealing with the first set of crap. And then it moves into a second phase as the election becomes, draws nearer and the ballots are mailed out. Well, first, we try to prevent people from getting ballots mailed to them by challenging their registration. If the registration succeeds or we don't get to challenge it in time and the ballot goes out, we will challenge the validity of having sent them a ballot in the first place. When they start to get returned, we'll challenge them then. And when they're counted, we'll challenge them again. And then if the count comes out against us, we'll challenge the validity of the count. And then if we can't challenge the validity of the count, we will try to force Republican elections board members to not certify those results. And if we fail at that, or they get forced, or there's a writ of mandamus issued and the vote count is certified, we will attempt to, field fake electors, force Republican governors to withhold their signatures from certificates of ascertainment, send forged certificates of ascertainment to the Congress and everywhere that the electoral votes are supposed to go, and then object on the floor of the House of Representatives during the joint session to the counting of electoral votes that they don't like, on and on and on. And then finally, maybe we could just get a crowd to murder everybody. Or, first just threaten to murder everybody and see if that scares them into doing the right thing. And if not, then we'll smash the windows and go in there. That sounds familiar. That was, of course, the January 6th play and everything that led up to it. You know all that story. They're doing it again. Republican congressmen from Pennsylvania have filed a federal lawsuit, we're in early stages here, seeking stricter scrutiny of votes cast by U.S. citizens living abroad, reflecting a new GOP strategy to challenge the eligibility of a group of voters that includes overseas military personnel. Normally you salute and give them a discount on a Chevy, but here we say you're not allowed to vote. The lawmakers claim in the suit, which was filed this week, that because the local elections officials in Pennsylvania are not required to verify the identity or eligibility of voters who register overseas, that job falls to someone else because they're overseas, Those ballots are vulnerable to fraud. They have asked a federal judge to require officials to set aside completed ballots and not count them until voter eligibility can be determined. That is, so we can sue for months on end and hold up those ballots and hopefully thereby afford Trump the margin he needs to win Pennsylvania and start to make the claims that everything else was stolen if he doesn't have enough electoral votes elsewhere, and, grab the presidency. The lawsuit is notable for targeting a group of voters long thought to favor Republicans because of the prevalence of military personnel stationed overseas, but that is now seen as more evenly divided or even leaning Democratic. So he's lost control of the economy as an issue, losing control of most issues as Republican issues is crazy, says there's litter boxes and sex change operations going on all over the place, blah, blah, blah. On top of that, for some strange reason, people who actually are patriotic enough to join the military are saying, actually, this guy kind of sucks, and saying so in large enough numbers that they no longer honor the troops. Amazing. Unless they're dead already and can't vote. Not that they won't try to cast their ballots anyway. Keep an eye out for that. Well, my husband should have been a Medal of Honor winner. He was one, in fact. Yeah, sure. We won 7 Medals of Honor, and the most ever anybody has ever seen, like no one has ever seen before, and he's dead, and so they should be able to cast his ballot 7 times. Anyway, they are, in fact, now targeting overseas military votes. The suit adds a long list of Republican-backed litigation around the country, surprise, surprise, with just weeks to go before the November 5th election, with much of it aimed at disqualifying mail-in votes, just like they tried last time, or removing ineligible voters from rolls, or pretending that they're ineligible and removing them because they decided not to vote. It's interesting, too, now that I think about it. People who didn't vote in the last 2 federal elections being purged in, was it Georgia that had that rule? At the same time, like no more venerated voters in the world, if you're the New York Times, than undecided voters who really aren't sure whether they're going to cast a ballot or not. And golly, I can't tell the difference between the 2 candidates. And I don't know, gee whiz. And they won't stop asking these people how they're going to vote and why, even though most of them didn't vote. That's why they're undecided voters. They didn't decide last time either. In Georgia, they're just throwing those people off the voter rolls. In New York, they can't stop interviewing them. That's very interesting. Anyway, where were we? Yes, right. Pennsylvania has sent out 25,000 ballots. I think I missed a step here. Critics pounced on the suit as more evidence that the GOP is laying the groundwork to contest the outcome of the presidential vote if Vice President Kamala Harris defeats former President Donald Trump. And even if she doesn't, they'll be doing it anyway. That said, the suit, if successful, could cause the disqualification of thousands of eligible ballots. Pennsylvania has sent out 25,000 ballots to Americans abroad so far this year, according to the Office of the Secretary of State, Al Schmidt, a potentially decisive number in the event of a close election. In 2020, Joe Biden won both Arizona and Georgia by less than half that number. Pennsylvania is widely seen as among the most competitive states this year. In a lawsuit, 6 of Pennsylvania's 8 Republican congressmen argue that state law, that sucks. I hate state law. Pennsylvania state law sucks. It's the worst. State law makes it possible for ineligible individuals to, quote, register to vote without verification of identity or eligibility, but receive a ballot by email and then vote a ballot without providing identification at any step in the process. As a result, they say, the ultimate tally of the votes may not accurately reflect the legal results, that is the ones we want, which could affect a close congressional election. Congressional election, they're pretending this is about, not the presidential one. They don't really care about that, though. The suit claims that Pennsylvania's rules regarding overseas voting violate state and federal law, but critics say that's not true. Federal law defers to states. This was a Republican idea. They were fighting like mad last time for deferring to the states. Federal law defers to states to establish election rules, and it also specifically calls for the process of overseas voting to not be unduly burdensome. Now, that's kind of vague. What does it mean? The policies and procedures around overseas voting have been known for years. This is a sort of a deflection. but an interesting one, if not decades. The policies and procedures have been known for years, if not decades, said David Becker, who leads the nonpartisan Center for Election Innovation and Research, which promotes trust in U.S. elections. That's nice. For members of Congress to file a lawsuit 4 weeks before the presidential election about a law that is 4 decades old is disturbing and could put the right to vote at risk for many members of the military. Why, they're trying to influence the outcome of election. You can't allow that. At least if they were Democrats, you wouldn't be able to allow it. Pennsylvania law governing overseas voting, which has been in place for decades, requires Americans abroad to be previous residents of Pennsylvania and to attest to their eligibility. So they are doing it under penalty of perjury at the minimum. And, of course, it is illegal to knowingly cast an invalid ballot, so you could be prosecuted if you did such a thing. Now, you could be convicted of it and then asked to delay your sentencing until after the election because you're a very important person, but it might not work for you the same way it does for, let's say, someone convicted on 34 criminal counts in New York but still standing for election to the presidency. This lawsuit was filed 2 weeks after counties started mailing ballots to military and overseas voters, and it baselessly challenges Pennsylvania law, which provides clear procedures for processing applications by overseas voters, said Amy Gully, I guess, maybe Gulli, a spokeswoman for the Pennsylvania Department of State. Our service members deserve to have their votes counted. And if that doesn't make you stand up and salute, maybe you're a filthy communist infiltrator or a Republican member of Congress. Others said the case amounts to a fishing expedition given the lack of documentation of illegal exploitation of overseas voting. The suit sows further doubt and mistrust in the legitimacy of U.S. elections, despite the lack of evidence of widespread fraud, heightening the possibility of civil unrest and even violence should Trump lose, the critics said. We're definitely seeing a series of desperate and legally questionable attempts to suppress the vote. And I think for the sake of overseas military voters and all overseas voters, we definitely hope that they fail, said Philip Hensley Robin, Executive Director of Common Cause Pennsylvania, a nonpartisan government watchdog. A lawyer for the Republican lawmakers, Eric Kardal, it's 3 A's in it, but 2 in a row, Kardal. I'm certainly not Afrikaner or anything like worrisome, I'm sure. I don't know what Kardal actually is, but it is Eric in the Identity Europa sense, we'll say. ERICK. It's a small number and I'm sure I'm offending some poor, innocent, Democratic, progressive Eric with a CK out there somewhere, but Eric Kardal, be interested to see what he's all about. Anyway, he's the lawyer for the Republican lawmakers, or at least one of them, and he was involved in several cases, as it turns out, in 2020, challenging the certification of Biden's win. I can't believe it. He did not respond to a request for comment. How about a request for arresting him? Well, the ballots in question are governed by a federal law. Hey, man, I thought you said state law. It's a little confusing. The ballots in question are governed by federal law known as the Uniform and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, which requires states to allow eligible Americans living abroad, including military personnel, to vote in federal elections. Although many states require overseas voters to provide identification such as a driver's license or a passport, Pennsylvania does not. That is interesting. Overseas voting has traditionally been supported by both Republicans and Democrats because of how many uniformed Americans use it. Even in 2020, when then-President Donald Trump attempted to discredit domestic absentee balloting in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, he and his allies did not attack overseas voting. I think they definitely did flirt with it, though. That's my recollection. That's when everyone thought overseas meant military. Not true. Cleta Mitchell, one of the lawyers who helped Trump challenge his defeat 4 years ago, said in a text message, and they should note, one of the participants in the infamous Brad Raffensperger call. She goes on to say approximately 63% of overseas ballots in 2020 were non-military. But so what? Were they legitimate? That's the question. I'm just saying they're non-military. Mitchell said she worked with local leaders to prepare the litigation in Pennsylvania after learning that the state doesn't verify the identity of overseas voters. I don't know if that's the case, but they don't ask them for passport or driver's license. Maybe. She began examining the issue in 2021. She began examining the issue in 2020, of course. But, by 2021, they mean January when she was on the Brad Raffensperger call. And stepped up the effort when Biden issued an executive order requiring the Defense Department to facilitate voting among both military and non-military Americans abroad. The civilian makeup of overseas voters is a problem, Mitchell said, because she believes tax dollars are being used for partisan voter outreach. It is not, it's just voter outreach. The fact that most people in America hate your guy, and most of the people who are Americans and live overseas hate your guy, that's actually a you problem, not a me problem. But in addition, she said many states don't follow their own laws regarding voter verification. Someone in the United States could easily request an overseas ballot in these, quote, very insecure systems, she said. They could, do they? That's the part that's always missing from these things. Well, they could. That's the point. Now, the point of the criminal justice system is, did they? That's where the rubber meets the road in the legal system. Elon Musk has amplified these claims on Twitter, the social media platform that he owns, by the way, about the security of overseas voting. Late last week, Musk shared a post about Democrats, quote, plan to steal elections using, quote, overseas ballots, an internal quote there, adding, is this for real? 2 days later, Trump shared Musk's post and wrote, lawyers at RNC, stop this fraud now, all caps, of course. Oh, by the way, last night, I don't know if you caught his Truth Social thing, that the screen cap of which made the rounds. I don't know, he threw in, this is a very weird old man complaint letter thing. He had a whole all caps rant, and then he closed it with, thank you for your attention to this matter, as though we were writing to Bell Telephone to complain about his bill or something like that. Anyway, neither here nor there, but that does remind me we have something about Musk and the Musk family out there, which, if I recall correctly, Elon Musk's mom was on social media, presumably Twitter, also spreading some weirdo conspiracy theory about voter fraud, and then making the key Republican mistake that always lands them in jail, saying, well, all the Democrats are cheating, so Republicans should go out and register 100 times and cast 100 fake ballots to stuff the ballot box for Donald Trump. I forget exactly how she phrased the thing, but if you had Elon Musk's mom goes to prison on your elections bingo card, call me and let me know if you had that ahead of time. Anyway, I'll dig up that tweet for you if I can. But yeah, so now Musk getting in on the act and Donald Trump yelling, stop the fraud, of which there's no proof of it ever happening. And again, in the criminal justice system, you're supposed to have that kind of proof. It happened. That's why we're going to court. It could happen. Not a reason to go. The Republican National Committee filed a lawsuit in North Carolina last week challenging the eligibility of a small subset of overseas voters. On Tuesday, National Republicans filed a similar lawsuit in Michigan. The two are among a handful of states that allow people born overseas to parents who were previously legal residents to cast ballots too. Birthright citizenship. Democrats think Republicans are now focused on overseas voting in part because of the proliferation of remote workers abroad, and the drawdowns of overseas military personnel may have made the makeup of that voting group more democratic. I see. We got to get the troops out. We got to get the troops out. Oh, he goes, Biden gets the troops out. Yeah, you got the troops out the wrong way, but we can't have troops here and troops there. We're not going to defend everybody. We're going to bring all these troops home to America. We did. Okay, right. So now it's terrible because, yeah, we've created another problem for ourselves. January 6th taught us that there is no low to how far people will go to try to overturn an election, and we're seeing that play out now, said Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who is a Democrat, they note helpfully, referring to the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol in 2021 intended to thwart the final step of certifying Biden's victory, in case you're coming late to the game here. These are duplicate lawsuits, all designed to deplete voter confidence and tie up the courts, of course, and set up a scenario where the will of the people can be disregarded. not only tie up the courts, but tie up the elections board people who are supposed to be very busy very soon. Benson said the number of voters born overseas who have never lived stateside is probably tiny, but the office does not track that data, because who cares? If you have the eligibility to vote, we don't care where you live, where you were, or any of those things. If you're eligible to vote, I don't care anything about it. We checked your validity, and that's that. It would be impossible to segregate those ballots to discard them, she said. So that may be something that the Republicans know, and so their alternative, well, discard all the ballots then, especially if Harris wins that state. And if we can't get you to do it, we can try to get the Republican members of Congress to do it on January 6, 2025. There's little data showing how overseas residents tend to vote, but numerous elections officials and activists said they believe the numbers skew Democratic. Martha McDevitt Pugh, chairwoman of Democrats Abroad and a resident of the Netherlands, said overseas voters cast 18,000 ballots in Georgia and roughly the same number in Arizona in the 2020 election, far more than the overall margin of victory for Biden in both states. She said she suspects Republicans have studied those numbers and realized that overseas votes can make a difference. They're looking for a way to intimidate voters as well as find a way to challenge the election afterward, she said. Voting-related litigation has ramped up this fall, with just weeks to go before the election. Kyle Miller, Pennsylvania policy strategist for Protect Democracy, said Republicans are filing zombie lawsuits that are unlikely to go anywhere but act as placeholders for later litigation. So the concern here is not necessarily that they're going to win on their merits prior to the election, but that they are going to be used to provoke elective diversion efforts on the back end, Miller said. I'd like to hear some more explanation of exactly how that would work. The 6 congressmen who brought the Pennsylvania case are Guy Reschenthaler, I don't think I've ever heard of him, Dan Muser, Glenn Thompson, Lloyd Smucker. With a name like Smucker, it has to be almost good, I guess. Anyway, Mike Kelly, that guy I know, and Scott Perry, 2 wackadoodles we've heard lots from before. Lloyd Smucker. Well, loved your work on the strawberry jam, dude. The other guys I don't know. All voted not to accept Pennsylvania's electoral votes, their own electoral votes, on January 6, 2021, despite the lack of evidence of widespread fraud, and now a completely different election, still lacking the evidence of widespread fraud, and still looking to invalidate Pennsylvanians' votes. Perry's phone was seized by the FBI during the Justice Department's investigation into the attempt to activate Trump's presidential electors in states that Biden won to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Yeah, so he's kind of a bad guy. All are seeking re-election this year, which is amazing. Pennsylvania Fair Elections is also a plaintiff in the case, looking to make elections unfair, I guess. In a statement, Muser said, if I'm pronouncing his name right, please pardon me. We must ensure that the votes of our brave service members, we love them, and overseas citizens, we kind of like them, are protected from dilution and manipulation. Every illegal vote, of which there are so far none, cancels out the legal vote of an American citizen. It does not. That's just not really a concept, but okay. Federal law requires elections officials to ensure that valid overseas ballots are duly counted, requiring only that the voters submit a postcard each federal election cycle attesting to their eligibility and including a signed oath with their ballot. Pennsylvania statutes say that a qualified absentee elector shall not be required to provide proof of identification for overseas ballots. And while that might strike you as weird, at the same time, they are strictly enforcing or attempting to strictly enforce the otherwise ludicrous or the other ludicrous Pennsylvania rules in which if you don't put the date that you cast your ballot on your mail-in ballot or on the envelope that contains your mail-in ballot, that somehow, for some reason, renders your ballot invalid. And they just point to it and say, I don't know what to tell you. It doesn't serve any purpose. It doesn't help validate anything. It doesn't establish your residency or your eligibility. It's just a requirement of the law. So we just say, hey, man, the law says what it says. And if your ballot doesn't have it, then your ballot doesn't count. But all of a sudden, hey, man, it's what the law says is no longer good enough for them when it comes to counting overseas ballots, even from the military. USA, support the troops. All right. Oh, that reminds me. There was a story somewhere, and I don't think I even put it aside anywhere. I just thought it was interesting, but maybe I'll go and look for it and make a note to myself that out in Pennsylvania, where they have that ludicrous rule about that can invalidate your ballot if you have it dated wrong or didn't put the date or didn't sign the envelope, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody, and I think an elections official at some level, I got to dig this thing up, has come up with the very interesting notion of putting together essentially an ice cream truck for voting, I think is the way they sort of described it. If you have submitted a ballot that has a problem with it, like it's unsigned on the envelope, or the date is missing, or what have you, that they would go around neighborhood to neighborhood essentially and look for the people who needed to cure their ballots, maybe try and hunt them down based on their addresses. I don't know if that's really safe sounding, but at any rate, if you think that you might have such a problem, this mobile unit might show up in your precinct and you would have a chance to cure your ballot and save it before counting time comes around. I thought that was a very innovative approach and very interesting, and no doubt Cleta Mitchell will be suing to stop it at some time in the near future if she hasn't already. All right, time for us to wrap things up. Thanks to our contributors who sent in pre-recorded segments today and helped, relax things, save the voice a little bit. And time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, so that I don't have to do the next hour. He's saving my voice for that, too. What's he got on tap for you today? Trump's secret talks with Putin are being called the October surprise, but is it really a surprise? That's a good question. On the rest of the menu, a federal judge. Those guys again. We'll hear more evidence on whether to reopen voter registration in Georgia that was closed down because of the hurricanes. Good
From
point. Interesting question.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
In case you find this important, the Democratic National Committee campaign office in suburban Phoenix has been struck in a third shooting in just the last 2 weeks. And U.S. inflation cooled again last month in the latest sign of a healthy economy. Can't have one of those if you want to win if you're a Republican. We'll be back tomorrow.